Niall Ferguson, Empire, How Britain Made the Modern World. Prepare to dive deep into the fascinating origin, growth, and unraveling of the British Empire in Empire, How Britain Made the Modern World by Niall Ferguson. Explore the crucial role of piracy and privateering in the genesis of the empire, and how consumerism drove its expansion across the globe. Understand how enterprising individuals, commercial desires, and wars forged the empire's vast territories, and how migration and the slave trade sowed its seeds. Finally, witness the decline of the empire, following massive wars and mounting costs that ultimately challenged both the human and financial orders. This summary delivers a compelling chronicle of how the British Empire shaped world history and laid the foundation for our contemporary existence.
Buccaneers shape British Empire. England was initially late to imperialism, but they turned fortune in their favor by adopting piracy as an official policy. Buccaneers like Henry Morgan and Christopher Newport attacked Spanish colonies and ships, accumulating wealth and laying the groundwork for future British colonies. Profitable ventures like sugar cane farming in Jamaica soon reinforced England's presence in the Americas. During the 16th century, while European powerhouses like Spain and Portugal were already establishing their empires in the Americas, England had no such presence. Instead of colonizing, England chose to disrupt the Spanish Empire by focusing on seizing the hard-earned wealth that Spain had accumulated from conquering these distant lands. And thus, the British Empire found its early footing through partnering with buccaneers. England's concern over Spain's rapid expansion and the spread of Catholicism prompted them to find a clever method to counteract, unleashing private naval warfare, or privateering, as it was officially known. England's initial attempts to explore the New World proved fruitless, so they resorted to stealing from the already rich Spanish colonies. Queen Elizabeth recognized the potential of this strategy and made piracy an official policy. British rogues like Henry Morgan and Christopher Newport were sanctioned by the Crown, becoming agents who sought to clash with and loot Spanish settlements and vessels. The policy paid off. Advancements in artillery, navigation, and maneuverability allowed English ships to outpace their Spanish counterparts, reaping considerable rewards. In 1599, Christopher Newport joined a daring gold heist from a Spanish colony in Tabasco, Mexico, losing an arm but securing incredible wealth. Henry Morgan's expeditions had an even more significant impact, not only accumulating riches but also laying the groundwork for some of the first British colonies. Organizing a series of raids in 1668 on modern-day Cuba, Panama, and Venezuela, Morgan demonstrated his cunning with limited resources and skillfully pocketed his profits. Unlike other pirates, Morgan was a strategic investor, purchasing land in Jamaica with his ill-gotten gains. As Jamaica's fertile land proved suitable for growing sugar cane, England seized the opportunity to expand its influence and transform the island into an official colony. Fittingly, Henry Morgan was appointed its governor, having played a central role in founding one of the first territories that would ultimately define the British Empire. Sweet commerce and imperial growth. English cravings for sugar and imported goods like tea, coffee, and tobacco fueled their empire's expansion in the 18th century. The East India Company, initially in direct competition with its Dutch counterpart, played a significant role in fulfilling consumer demand, eventually leading to the merging of the two companies. Commerce and consumerism were the driving forces behind imperial growth, as the British Empire became deeply entrenched in India, Southeast Asia, Africa, and the West Indies. The insatiable English appetite for sugar, an affordable treat for both aristocrats and commoners, set the stage for the 18th century craze for imported goods. Tea, coffee, tobacco, cotton, ginger, chocolate, and rice became mainstays of the English diet, with tea consumption alone skyrocketing from under £800,000 in 1740 to over £2.5 million a mere decade later. The demand for these goods paved the way for remarkable global impact, rooted in the power of commerce and consumerism. To satisfy consumer demands, the East India Company took center stage. However, the English East India Company wasn't the only player in this game, its counterpart, the Dutch East India Company, posed significant competition. The two companies, founded just 2 years apart in the early 17th century, engaged in such intense rivalry that 3 wars erupted between England and the Dutch Republic from 1652 to 1674. The Dutch largely emerged victorious in these conflicts, thanks to their advanced economy and early adoption of modern finance principles. These defeats resulted in a coup in England in 1688, dethroning King James II and welcoming Dutch influence. William of Orange, the Dutch national leader, ascended to the English throne, bringing with him a financial revolution that would merge the competing East India companies. In 1694, inspired by the Bank of Amsterdam, the Bank of England was born. With the establishment of government bonds, credit and debt management, and a revitalized navy, the Dutch financial system empowered England to expand its empire on a grand scale. Using the newly merged East India Company's impressive profits and influence as a springboard, England ingrained itself in India, Southeast Asia, Africa, the West Indies, and beyond. The ever-growing empire thrived on the irresistible allure of commerce and consumerism, driven by the English love for sugar and other enticing imports. Empire battles and conquests. The East India Company's ever-expanding trade empire led to bureaucracy, side businesses, and competition with France. After the unification of Scotland and England to form the United Kingdom of Great Britain, the new nation's superior naval power became evident. The 7 Years' War could be considered the First World War, as it involved the major European powers fighting for control over North America, the Caribbean, and India. Eventually, Britain emerged victorious, largely due to its solid financial resources, resulting in India firmly in the hands of Great Britain. The East India Company's foray into lands far and wide invariably came with a generous dose of bureaucracy. Settlements were sprung, fortifications raised, and company men placed in strategic locations to ensure a steady flow of trade and profit. However, the operation wasn't flawless. Far from England's watchful gazes, opportunistic company men, like Thomas Pitt, began engaging in side businesses to supplement their income. Initially disapproved by the company, these side hustles soon garnered a thumbs up from the brass, as they created new connections and boosted overall business. Predictably, France, England's arch-rival, didn't twiddle its thumb as its competition flourished. In 1664, France established its own East India Company, initiating heated tensions between the two nations. Enter 1707, and the parliaments of Scotland and England joined forces, giving rise to the United Kingdom of Great Britain. With this merger, the English Empire grew in size and stature. The War of Spanish Succession in 1713 shook Spain's naval power, effectively cementing Britain's role as the reigning European naval force. Nevertheless, a more massive conflict loomed, the 7 Years' War. Commencing in 1756, the colossal fight featured prominent European powers such as Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Spain, all grappling for supremacy. Amid the chaos, the most critical question begged an answer: would France or Britain rule the world? Territorial disputes in North America, the Caribbean, and India fueled much of the conflict. When the dust settled, Britain stood tall, claiming vast swathes of land from France, including Canada, Florida, Dominica, Grenada, Tobago, St. Vincent, and the strategic region of Bengal in India. Britain's triumph was primarily attributed to its financial prowess, well equipped for a protracted war, unlike France. Though tensions and territorial swaps continued between the two titans, the 7 Years' War signaled India's submission to Great Britain's dominance. Empire forged by migration. India was an attractive destination for intrepid Britons seeking fortune and adventure, leading to a massive migration in the 17th century that laid the foundation of the British Empire. A broad spectrum of people journeyed for various reasons, such as indentured servitude offering the hope of eventual freedom, or those forcibly taken as slaves during the international slave trade. As the movement for abolition gained traction in Britain, the slave trade was eventually banned in the British Empire in 1808. However, with the advent of the Victorian era, non-Christian subjects found themselves under pressure to adopt the Christian faith, leading to unforeseen consequences. The allure of India's riches and exotic experiences drew numerous Britons to its shores in hopes of attaining wealth and worldly success. This migration marked a historical moment that served as the basis of the sprawling British Empire. In the 17th century alone, around 700,000 adventurous souls from the British Isles ventured forth to foreign lands. Some people willingly took the risk to cross the Atlantic as indentured servants, accepting a 5-year term of servitude with the promise of freedom thereafter. Despite surviving the treacherous voyage, they still faced the perils of new diseases and cruel overseers. Concurrently, the international slave trade thrived on forced labor and human suffering. By 1750, British ships had transported around 800,000 enslaved Africans to the Caribbean, while a staggering 3.5 million people were dispatched to North America by 1807. Towards the late 18th century, abolitionist groups such as evangelical Protestants and Quakers began to alter the course of history. Through their political power, the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade influenced the 1808 ban on slave trading within the British Empire. Entering the Victorian era in 1837, religious groups gained prominence, promoting respect for human rights while simultaneously pressuring non-Christians to embrace Christianity, a decision that would later have dire consequences. Balancing empire and control. The transportation of around 150,000 convicts to Australia between 1787 and 1853 eventually led to the emergence of a thriving community in the once barren land. The British government, having learned from the loss of their North American colonies, chose to grant more autonomy to other territories, such as Australia, while maintaining oversight. This approach allowed for a more stable governing model, and despite conflicts with indigenous populations, the colonizers saw some form of restraint in their power. Between 1787 and 1853, Australia became a destination for approximately 150,000 individuals convicted of various crimes like forgery and perjury. Instead of serving their sentences in regular prisons, they were sent on 8-month-long boat trips to the distant land, where they would toil away in hard labor. Early on, the treacherous voyage led people to call these boats hell ships, but things changed as time went on. After experiencing initial hardships, the convicts managed to establish a flourishing community, transforming Australia from a barren wasteland into a thriving boomtown. Word of this transformation traveled across the seas, reaching London and leading some to feel envy towards those who were being shipped off to the new land. Interestingly, these prisoners created a more stable community than the pilgrims who had journeyed to America. As the British Empire expanded, it struggled with maintaining oversight and control over its distant territories. The colonization of Australia took place as the colonies in America were declaring their independence, and the British government had learned a bitter lesson from its experience with the North American colonies. Conflict had arisen in North America due to a lack of autonomy and resentment towards imposed laws and taxes by a faraway government. After recognizing the United States' independence, Britain hoped to maintain a trade partnership by offering what it had denied America, self-government. This policy was extended to territories like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Despite Australia's progress, it endured its own struggles, including the ongoing battle between colonizers and indigenous populations such as the Aborigines. This strife mirrored the plight of Native Americans in the United States. However, the British government granted Australia self-government but retained oversight, a decision that led to the formation of Aboriginal protectorates in New South Wales and Western Australia. Although violence continued, their interference helped to provide a necessary restraint on the colonizers' power, an element absent in the treatment of Native Americans in the United States. Victorian missionaries and rebellion. During the Victorian era, Great Britain's exploitation of India included the spread of Christianity by missionaries, fueling tensions that eventually led to rebellion. Christian organizations were driven by genuine concerns, such as female infanticide and sati, a practice in which Hindu widows were burned alive on their husband's funeral pyre. Victories against these practices garnered support, but also generated concerns about further religious impositions. Tensions escalated when the Indian Army introduced new turbans and bullet cartridges that violated various religious beliefs. This culminated in a violent uprising when soldiers were jailed for their refusal to comply. In the Victorian era, India faced an avalanche of Christian missionaries amid Great Britain's economic exploitation. These missionaries were driven by an urge to intervene in the alarming practices of female infanticide and suttee. Their efforts led to successful bans on such customs by authorities like the Maharaja of Marwar and Governor-General William Bentinck. Although these changes were largely appreciated, many Indians saw them as the beginning of a trend towards religious encroachment. Notably, Lt. Col. William Playfair warned Bentinck's office about rebellion brewing due to such measures. The situation reached a boiling point when the Indian Army introduced new turbans with brocades made from animal hide and bullet cartridges lubricated with animal fat. These developments deeply offended the Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh soldiers, known as sepoys, as their religious beliefs were closely tied to their warrior identities. Refusing to use the new equipment, these sepoys found themselves jailed for insubordination, which ultimately ignited a widespread and violent rebellion. Overall, Victorian-era's missionary influx generated a mix of beneficial reforms and unsettling impositions. Despite successful efforts to eradicate harmful practices, the threat of further religious intervention and disrespect for existing beliefs contributed to an explosive conflict. The introduction of insensitive military equipment served as a catalyst for unrest, reminding us of the delicate balance between cultural change and preservation. Empire expansion, commerce and conflict. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, resulted in thousands of casualties and ultimately led to the British government officially ruling India through the Government of India Act 1858. This marked a significant change in imperial control. In Africa, the British Empire expanded further due to commercial ambitions. Driven by figures such as Dr. David Livingstone and Cecil Rhodes, these endeavors led to the establishment of significant territories, like Rhodesia, which cemented the empire's power on the continent. The violent upheaval of the Sepoy Mutiny in India had a profound impact on the region. In retaliation for thousands of European deaths, the Indian populace suffered even greater losses, as depicted in the chilling account by British Lieutenant Kendall Coghill. The event augured a significant shift. The East India Company became part of the British government through the Government of India Act 1858, resulting in the official British rule of India. While the British government played an active role in India, private enterprise led the way in expanding the empire elsewhere. In Africa, commercial desires drove the empire's growth. Dr. David Livingstone, a quintessential Victorian missionary, embodied British intentions in Africa, aiming to bring wholesome commerce and put an end to the East African slave trade. Although his dreams of introducing Christianity were mostly unsuccessful, he remained steadfast in his commitment to Africa until his death in 1873. The late 19th century saw the rise of aggressive commercial explorers, like Cecil Rhodes, who sought to capitalize on the continent's resources. Funded by Nathaniel de Rothschild, Rhodes orchestrated the establishment of the De Beers Company in southern Africa through a land deal with the King of Matabele. The king believed he was signing over mining rights, however, Rhodes's ultimate ambition was far more expansive. With the aid of the high-powered Maxim machine gun, Rhodes and his 700 men defeated a Matabele army of 1,500, claiming the territory of Rhodesia for the British Empire. Rhodes's vision to connect North to South Africa with an unbroken chain of British territories presented the prospect of an empire with unprecedented strength. By the 20th century, his ambitious dream came tantalizingly close to realization, with the British Empire's influence extending further than ever before in Africa. The empire's tipping point. The scramble for Africa involved countless European countries, including Britain, and marked the British Empire's zenith. However, this growth did not last forever. The Boer Wars and tragic events in Africa marked the beginning of the empire's downfall. As the liberals took power within Britain, the nation questioned the morality and economic impact of their imperial pursuits. While facing a looming war with Germany, the empire realized that its vast territories proved essential in securing a victory during the Great War. During the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa took place, with Germany, France, Belgium, Portugal, Spain, and Italy all vying for power on the continent. Britain's claims extended from Egypt to South Africa, with German East Africa being the only barrier to a seamless stretch of British rule. Covering nearly a quarter of the globe, the British Empire reached its peak during this time. However, this golden age would soon reveal its tipping point. In the pursuit of securing diamond and gold mines in southern Africa, Britain became embroiled in the Boer Wars between 1880 and 1902. They fought against the fierce Boer republics, independent states in Southeast Africa resulting from Dutch settlements. This brutal conflict saw the destruction of 30,000 Boer homes and the internment of women, children, and black South Africans in poorly maintained camps, resulting in nearly 60,000 deaths. When news of these tragedies reached Britain, grief and indignation flooded the nation. Recognizing an opportunity, the Liberals in Parliament ascended to power. Publications like J. A. Hobson's Imperialism, a study, in 1902 argued that the empire was a burdensome tax system that benefited only a select few of the wealthy elite. The Liberals, now holding power, faced a brewing war with Germany, who had masterfully pitted the British against the French in their negotiations over Africa. Despite possessing a superior army, the prospect of German domination in Europe unsettled even the pacifistic Liberal government. The Great War brought to light the empire's necessity and potential. One-third of the troops fighting on behalf of Britain were from the colonies, showcasing the exceptional bravery and devotion of Indian, Australian, and New Zealander soldiers. In the end, it was the strength of the British Empire that made victory in the Great War possible. Collapse of the British Empire. The British Empire began to decline after the financial strain of World War I, and by the end of World War II, it was on the brink of collapse. Despite being granted new territories after World War I, Britain struggled to maintain its empire while simultaneously rebuilding its defenses. During World War II, Britain relied on its colonial soldiers and assistance from its American allies, ultimately resulting in a shift in global power. The end of the war left Britain in debt and facing the disapproval of its colonial system by the United States. As a consequence, the empire began to dissolve, eventually replaced by the Commonwealth. This transformation prompts questions about the feasibility of a cooperative, non-exploitative empire that can offer stability and protection in the future. After the financial burden of World War I, the British Empire was stretched to its limits. With new territories, such as Iraq, costing the UK substantial sums, it neglected to invest in defense and military modernization. This vulnerability was evident during the onset of World War II, as Britain's reliance on horses rather than advanced weaponry put them at a distinct disadvantage compared to Germany. Undeterred, Britain utilized the strength of its colonial troops, enlisting around 5 million soldiers and ultimately benefiting from the timely intervention of the United States in the war. However, this alliance marked the emergence of America as a dominant world power and a growing disapproval of the traditional British colonial system. Post-war negotiations highlighted this stance, with U.S. presidents such as Roosevelt and Eisenhower expressing concerns over colonization's implications for global peace. Faced with mounting debt and pressure to rebuild, Britain witnessed the crumbling of its empire. By 1947, key territories like India gained independence, gradually replaced by the modern Commonwealth framework encompassing 54 nations. This historical shift provokes reflection on the possibility of constructing a cooperative empire, devoid of exploitation, that can provide stability and protection. However, the adverse legacy of imperialism and colonialism seems to deter contemporary nations from pursuing such ambitious endeavors.
The British Empire played a pivotal role in shaping the modern world, as Niall Ferguson deftly illustrates in Empire: How Britain Made the Modern World. From its humble beginnings established by pirates and buccaneers to the far-reaching impact of commerce, wars, and conflicts on its territories across the globe, the empire was both filled with success and tainted by tragedy. Driven by the forces of migration, slave trade, and the rise of Christianity, it wielded influence that would reverberate through the ages. Ultimately, the cost of two major wars triggered its decline and led to the emergence of the Commonwealth and the United States as dominant powers. As we reflect upon these lessons, can we envision a more just and cooperative empire that successfully navigates the challenges of our increasingly globalized world?